All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Bruce Dancis. Bruce is a longtime activist, a journalist, and the author of the new book, Resistor, a story of protest and prison during the Vietnam War, which you can find at Cornell Press. Bruce, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me, Matt.
All right, so Bruce, in your book, you describe, among many other things, how in the 1960s you went to prison after destroying your draft card. I guess let's begin our discussion by describing what led you to make that decision.
Sure. Well, Vietnam led me to make that decision. I mean, the war was an extremely unpopular war, not just on college campuses, but increasingly as the 60s went on throughout the society, including among GIs. The draft was something that every young man of draft age in those days was affected by. When I was a student at Cornell, I had a choice of getting a student deferment or not. I felt they were unfair. I thought that generally privileged kids were able to go to college, and a lot of kids who weren't able to afford it didn't, and they were subject to the draft. So I rejected that, and I was classified 1A, and I decided that I was not going to fight in Vietnam, and I was going to no longer cooperate with the selective service system. So in December 1966, when I was a sophomore, I was 18 years old, I tore up my draft card at a rally and read a statement and mailed the pieces of my draft card and my statement back to my draft board in New York City. Eventually, I was prosecuted for that. I also refused induction into the armed services. I got involved in organizing other draft resistance activities. I finally went to prison in May 1969.
So to describe the time between, so you tore up the draft card in 1966, you said?
Yes.
Describe from that moment, because you wrote that you were like, you thought, well, there's a chance I might be arrested right here, like right after I rip up the card. Like, describe the time between you actually tore it up to when you were actually eventually approached by I guess, federal agents. How did this actually go down?
Sure. Well, you're right. Exactly. I did think that, okay, I'm committing this crime. We knew there'd be a lot of agents there since the news had gotten out about it. There were a lot of reporters. But nothing happened at first. Then with some other anti-war people at Cornell, we decided let's try to organize a larger draft card burning, which was set. There was a big anti-war rally scheduled for April 15th, 1967 in New York. And we decided we were to try to organize the first mass draft card burning at that time. Around 5 days before that, I got indicted. And to one of my fondest possessions, which I got from my FBI file, is a note from J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, to Albany, New York Bureau, saying it's important that we indict this guy before the April 15th rally. He's an organizer of this, and clearly they were trying to. Hopefully, that by indicting me would scare off people from taking part. But around 175, 185 people burned their draft cards that day. I then got involved in organizing with a group called The Resistance. And in 1967 and 68, we organized 3 nationwide draft card turn-ins, where young men and their supporters, women and older people, turned in their draft cards or letters of support to their local draft boards. And around, 2,000 people took part in all that. So it took a while, for the movement to start to grow. It didn't grow as fast or as large as I hoped it would. But eventually, after my indictment, I went on trial in September 68. I was convicted. I was denied bail, but then I was let out on bail. But I finally did go to prison in May 69.
Well, again, it's sort of wild. And you talked to this because you actually eventually got through the Freedom of Information Act. You got to see what the feds had on you, and it's one of those instances where a lot of people know of things like COINTELPRO or all
right.
the ridiculous spying, but right now this is something that we're dealing with now with all these NSA revelations, with the spying on the Occupy movement, with the spying on environmental groups. Describe. Let's go through what exactly was in your file, other than a personal note from J. Edgar Hoover, which is just nuts.
Well,
but talk about what did you find in there?
So my file was actually a wonderful historical resource. Not that I could always trust whether the observations by the FBI agents or their informers were accurate. They provided a detailed chronicle of my activities. So to give you an example, in fall 1965, I was a student at Cornell University, and we formed an SDS chapter. That's the Students for a Democratic Society, which is the largest New Left organization. And this is my first meeting, and first meeting of the organization. It had existed earlier, but had disbanded, and so we started it up again. And there's an item in my FBI file. Dancis attended this meeting. He said he would hand out information about alternatives to the draft in downtown Ithaca.
Wow.
And here I was just a kid. I was 18. Hadn't done anything illegal except maybe in my mind, And, but so stuff like that is happening all the time. I mean, it seems like they were at every meeting, every rally. They were, not that we were doing anything that was hidden. I mean, I thought one of the cornerstones of the movement, especially in that day, is that we were very open. People could come to our meetings. We weren't, checking people's credentials at the door. All of our discussions were public. But I mean, I was just amazed at the depth of the surveillance. Let's put it that way. I also found out that after we did this draft card burning in 1967, that a grand jury hearing took place. Well, I knew about the hearings later, around 6 months, but I didn't know that they were actually considering charges of sedition against us.
Whoa.
Which was unbelievable, So that was amazing to find that out. But I guess overwhelmingly it's the sheer amount of detail. Yeah.
Wow. I'm talking to Bruce Dancis about his new book, Resistor, A Story of Protest and Prison During the Vietnam War. You can find it at Cornell Press. What's crazy, and again, I think this is something that people don't really entirely, in this day and age when, the draft was ended eventually by Nixon. People still register for selective service, but like the actual draft is not going on anymore. But I think it's like what you were ultimately charged with and convicted for wasn't actually even not reporting for military duty or anything like that. You were actually just convicted for destroying a small piece of paper. Like that's what you went for prison for. That is like literally what you were charged with and were convicted for, the fact that you tore up a small piece of paper. And that to me is just that whole concept is just unbelievably insane in my mind.
It was pretty crazy. I mean, I guess they value the draft card as a symbol, and people who would destroy it as, defiling, this sacred document. It's funny. Most people didn't think of it that way. When I was in prison and people would ask me, what am I in for? And I say, well, I tore up my draft card and I sent it back to my draft board and said I wouldn't, sort of they say, what, you're in jail for tearing up a piece of paper? I mean, it was strange. Now, I did also refuse induction, and I think they had that in their back pocket in case the draft card charge didn't stick. But it did.
Yeah.
In those days, trials, judges, at least certainly in my judge, didn't allow any testimony about the war in Vietnam. It was pretty much, they let me make personal statements, but I had faculty, people ready to talk about Vietnam. I had Father Daniel Berrigan was one of my character witnesses. He wanted to talk about things. They wouldn't let him do any of that. It was pretty much, is this your draft card? Yes. Is that your signature? Yes. Are those the 4 pieces of paper? Yes. So my lawyer didn't have a lot to work with in me as a client.